Hello everyone, hope you're doing well, and as you can tell by the title and what's on my screen right now, we're going to be discussing the Odin project sign-up form. This video is intended for people that haven't done the sign-up project or want to see how other people have done it, and for me to just walk through how I did it and show you the features that I implemented, and maybe you want to implement the same features. Alright, so this is my sign-up form. It's quite small. Obviously you can make yours bigger, but I wanted mine to just be simple, small, compact, and yeah, it was easier to make this responsive as well because it's smaller. With this form, by default, I've set the button to be disabled, so you can't click it because everything's empty. And for the username, we can practically enter anything and it'll work. Obviously, I've set it so you can't enter all characters, but any normal username may work. For the first name, it has to be a first name. So for example, we could do Dean, that would work. If I try to enter another name for a second name, it'll tell me no by putting a red border around the input. For the email, I've made it the input. For the email, I've made it specifically so you have to include a .com at the end and an @ symbol, something before and after the @ symbol. So I know there's custom domains and other emails that don't end with .com, but just for the sake of validation and testing it, I just made it so it has to be a .com email. The phone number has to start with 04 and be 10 digits in total. So why 10 digits and why 04? Because that's just what's used where I live. And the password. And for the password, you have to include one uppercase, one lowercase, a special character, a digit, and it has to be a minimum of 8 characters. So, and if I try to, for example, enter a password in the confirm password section first, then it will tell me to enter a password. So that's pretty cool. I'll show you how I've done that if you're not sure how you would go about doing it. But I would need a valid password, and then it would go green, and also enter a valid password. Okay, see it now that my password, I mistyped it, it's not the same, and it's telling me that it's not the same, so that's also cool. And there we go. And now once I get out of this input confirm password area, you'll see that the button is now green and lit up, and I can click it and it's all cool. And yeah, so now I'll show you the code and anything that you... So now I'll go onto the code. And we'll talk about some of it. Alright, so here's the code. We'll start out with the HTML, move on to the JavaScript, and I'll include any CSS parts that may be interesting. So the HTML is quite simple. I'm sure you can generally expect how it's laid out. So we're inside the body tag. We have a main tag, which just contains all the main content, everything you see here except the footer. Then inside the main tag, we have 2 section tags. I'm not sure if it's better to use a section or a div tag. If you do know, please let me know. But I have 2 section tags. The first section tag is for the image, so image container, and it just, contains the image. And the second one is the content container, which just contains everything else. Inside the image tag, we have the image, the Odin word here, and like the text, this HTML image, and this small link at the bottom, which is a link to the Unsplash photo for the person that originally created this image. Within the content photo for the person that originally created this image. Within the content section, it's just the form and the text you see here. And the footer just contains my GitHub username and a little icon that, if you click on it, goes to my GitHub. So, alright, on to the interesting stuff, the JavaScript. So first, you can just see these variables, and that's each little item here, the form, the email input box, the username, and all that. Next, I put them all into an array, which I'll explain later why I do that. After that, we have all the regex for the different input boxes. And I decided to do this in JavaScript so I can have a custom validation for all. Of them, and when to say it's valid and not valid, instead of just putting it in the HTML pattern attribute. This next part is just a simple object that contains all the different input fields and the regex for it. So for example, for the first item, the username contains the username variable with the username regex, which will be used in a function later. The next part is a typing delay reaction, which I have set to 1000, so 1000 milliseconds. and that's used for the whole part here. So for example, when you enter something and then after a second you'll see it'll go green, and if you enter something incorrect it will go red, so that's for that. And then the typing timer, which is just a timer that gets set every time you enter. The typing timer variable is just a variable that will store how long you have not typed for. So for example, if I click A, then the typing timer will start getting incremented by milliseconds. And then the timer 2 is same thing, but just for something else. All these are the same. So the username, input, first name, and email and phone all have the same function and event listeners, as you can see, but the password is slightly different because it has to make sure that they are the same. And then the final event listener valid form is just for when change is made to the form, so we can disable or enable the button. The next part of the code is simply just two functions that check if the user input is valid or invalid. So the first function, check valid, basically just checks if the user input is valid. So the first if statement just checks if the field is empty or has something in it. If it is empty, then we remove all classes, and the valid and invalid class is added when the input is valid, or if it's invalid, so we can get a green border. And then so this last part just makes the input, resets the input validity if it's already invalid or valid. Okay, so the next part is if there is something inside the actual input, so if it does have a value. And then we start our timer with the set timeout function, and we just test the input against the regex here. So if you remember from the object above, the first element inside this array is the variable that contains the HTML element, and the second part is just the regex. So we are testing the regex against whatever the value of the input is. And if it returns true, then we add a valid class, remove invalid class, and we set a custom validity. And if it returns true, then we add a valid class, remove invalid class, and we set a custom validity to make it valid. If it's just empty quotes inside the set custom validity method, then it will make it valid. And over here you can see, which is just the opposite. And then the else statement here, basically, so if the regex didn't match the user value, we add the invalid class, we remove the valid class, and we set a custom validity, which this is also the message that you see the browser show you when you enter something incorrect. For example, here, this message is what the set custom validity does, and if there is a message, then it's an invalid. Then it sets that input field to invalid. And then the typing delay reaction is we want all of this to happen once we hit 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so the next function, checks passwords, just checks if the two passwords are the same. So if confirmed, so first we clear the timer by doing clear timeout, and that basically resets the timer variable, timer 2. And if the password value matches the confirmed password value and the confirmed password matches the regex, then we add a valid class, we remove the invalid class, we set a custom validity, empty string, so it's a valid field. And then the else statement, so basically if it isn't the same or doesn't match the regex, then we add the invalid class, we add the valid class, and then within that we have an if else statement, basically just to add. And within that we have an if else statement for the two different errors that could happen, one being that your passwords one being that the user has entered different passwords, so we set the custom validity to not the same password, and then we report it, so we show the message. And then if the user has an empty password, we set the custom validity to you need to enter a password, and then we report that. And then the end of the function here, and then the last part of the function is just an if statement saying if the confirmed password value is empty, so there's nothing inside the field, then we remove both the invalid class and the valid class, so it doesn't have a green or red border. Alright, so for this CSS there isn't much to really show, but if you wanted to check it out you still can. So I just have a media query to format it a bit nicer for mobile phones so we can get nice and skinny and still have the website looking nice. And then as we extend it, it goes back to normal size. You can check the code out on GitHub. Everything will be on GitHub, and the CSS is pretty self-explanatory. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below, and thank you for watching and have a great day.